In 1874, a book was created that was so deadly, production was limited to only 100 copies, and of those copies, only 5 currently remain. The libraries that they were sent to destroyed them. Yes, this was a real book. No, it wasn't cursed. In fact, it wasn't supernatural in any way, and it wasn't a manual containing illegal or otherwise forbidden information. Hey, what's up? It's Swell Boy. And in order to understand the book I want to tell you about today, I'm going to have to set up the context behind this book, because if I just showed you it, you wouldn't understand what you're looking at, since the book doesn't have any text in it. So let's rewind a little bit to the 1700s, and I'm going to tell you about a scientist named Carl Wilhelm Scheele. Scheele was a well-known physicist, most famous for discovering oxygen after noticing that fire wasn't sustained with every type of air. Only air with oxygen in it could keep a fire going. That's why when you put a lid on a lit candle, it goes out. All the oxygen in that air is used up. 5th grade stuff. Strangely, he wasn't the only person to discover oxygen. Around this time, 2 other Europeans discovered it as well, within a few years of each other, and Carl didn't receive credit for discovering it first. That's because he waited 3 whole years to publish his findings. Talk about a missed opportunity. But he discovered many other elements and used those discoveries to invent different things. Among them were color pigments. In the early 1770s, Scheele created a bright yellow hue made from chlorine and oxygen, but unfortunately had the patent for it stolen, and it ended up being named Turner's Yellow, after the company who now owned the patent. But this wouldn't be the last time he successfully experimented with colors, because in 1775, Scheele created a new type of green hue that captivated the world. This hue was called Scheele's green. What was special about Scheele's green was that at the time of its invention, the most commonly used green pigments were based on copper carbonate. These resulted in green colors that were too yellow or too teal looking, but when Scheele's green hit the market, it took the world by storm. Before, the only way to see such a vibrant green hue was to look at a plant outside, but now artists and decorators could use this pigment to bring the beautiful green shade of nature indoors. That was just one little problem. The pigment for Scheele's green was based on copper arsenate. And if that didn't ring any alarm bells in your head, you should know that arsenate is a salt or ester of arsenic acid. Arsenic being one of the most toxic chemicals to humans, or any multicellular being for that matter. Except for rats, hamsters, goats, and chickens, because those little freaks require trace quantities in their diet for some reason. The Environmental Protection Agency has gone on record to say that all forms of arsenic are a serious risk to human health. The United States Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry ranked arsenic as number 1 in its 2001 priority list of hazardous substances, and this chemical is classified as a Group A carcinogen. Some of the signs you've been poisoned by arsenic include headaches, confusion, severe diarrhea, and drowsiness. But that's just the start. As the poisoning develops, you will have convulsion, cramping muscles, hair loss, stomach pain. You will not only have regular vomit, but you will vomit blood and have blood in your urine. At the final stage of arsenic poisoning, you will fall into a coma and die. So no matter which way you cut it, arsenic is very, very deadly. And this guy, Carl Scheele, just made it the trendiest color of the early 1800s. There's a case to be made that he did this knowingly, because a year before this color went into production, he wrote to his friend about his reservations, wondering if people might want to know about its poisonous nature. But on the other hand, he probably thought a little arsenic never hurt anybody, because in the Victorian era, literally no one was aware just how unbelievably toxic this substance was. They thought it was only dangerous to ingest large amounts of the chemical. In fact, women were using it as a literal beauty product in order to whiten their skin and prevent wrinkles. So how else was Scheele's green implemented and finding itself in close human contact? Well, since the color was so cheap to manufacture, it ended up being incorporated into almost everything. It was used for painting both on the canvas and around the home. It was used to dye clothing, for children's toys, and it was a color that was especially popular among city dwellers, since their industrialized environment had been shrouded by the smog and brown building blocks of the city. Because the color was so representative of nature, it was used for fake plants which would not only decorate the home, but also be worn by women as flower crowns. And being that it was the height of Romanticism, Romanticism being a European movement characterized by its focus on emotion and the human connection to nature, it became very popular to have your walls decked out in imagery of vines, leaves, trees, and flowers. But it wasn't just the walls. William Morris, an arts and crafts influencer and textile company CEO, convinced those with an interest in home decoration to use his company's Scheele's Green colored carpeting, rugs, and drapes. For all his education and creativity, he always denied the possibility of arsenic being deadly. Maybe it had something to do with the workers at his family's world's largest copper mine and arsenic refinery constantly dying from arsenic poisoning. He would go on to claim that the reason for these deaths was witch fever and that all the doctors claiming arsenic poisoning were hacks. You'd think these examples were the extent of arsenic screen's hold on Victorian society, but it gets worse. Bakers were also using it as a dye for their food. Restaurants added it to drinks, and arsenic as a chemical was being used as medicine. The green dye was getting into the air as well because the cotton particles and dust from both the wallpapers and fabrics would rub off and be blown around for people to inhale right into their lungs. So how did this era of mass human poisonings end? Did the government step in and stop the mindless use of arsenic? Did activists take to the streets and force companies to cease production of these deadly products? No. It just fell out of fashion. By the middle of the 1800s, the Romanticism movement died, and with it, the world's obsession with Scheele's Green. Which brings us to the topic of the video. In 1874, a physician named Dr. Robert Clark Kenzie went around Michigan and collected wallpaper samples to be published for a book he was making. These samples were not unlike the ones you'd find in a catalog at your local hardware store. But they aren't just any kind of wallpaper samples. More specifically, they're samples of Scheele's Green wallpaper. This book was given an appropriate name, Shadows from the Walls of Death. So why would anybody want samples of these dangerous, arsenic-saturated wallpapers? Well, the book's creation was meant with the best intentions. See, at the time Dr. Kenzie was doing this, it was estimated that 65% of all wallpaper in the United States contained arsenic. So it wasn't just Europeans that were captivated by the brilliant greens that arsenic made possible. The trend was just as popular in the US. Being a physician serving on Michigan's Board of Health, Kenzie noticed a lot of women were going into decline, believing that they were sick with tuberculosis. These women would shut themselves indoors, hoping not to breathe any more foul air that might worsen their condition. Ironically, staying indoors and removing any ventilation made them even more susceptible to the arsenic-laden particles coming off their wallpapers. So to raise awareness about these poisonous papers, Kenzie collected his samples and bound them in 100 copies of Shadows from the Walls of Death with a preface letter stating how he believed arsenic wasn't only deadly from being ingested, but was just as deadly by any form of contact. Now, he didn't just send these copies out to random people. He sent them to public libraries with the hopes that anyone who wanted to know if the wallpaper in their house contained arsenic would have a resource they could compare the colors to. Unfortunately, this didn't work as planned because most of the libraries destroyed their copies right when they got them because they understandably didn't want to poison their patrons. To this day, there are only 4 remaining copies. One is in Harvard University Medical School. Another in the U.S. National Library of Medicine in Bethesda, Maryland. And the last 2 are in the libraries of Michigan State University and the University of Michigan. The National Library of Medicine has completely digitized the book and made it freely available to read online. The way this was done was that the workers had to wear personal protective equipment, and the book was scanned under a fume hood in laboratory conditions. The copy held by Michigan State University has the physical book available for all to see, with each of its pages safely encapsulated in plastic. Andrew Lundeen, a staff member at MSU's Tufgrass Information Center, says, "It's worth seeing in person. The light plays off of it beautifully. But it's like a poisoned dart frog. The most beautiful things can be the most dangerous. It's crazy to me that in modern times, we joke about how Victorian era people couldn't handle something like McDonald's Sprite or a White Claw, when they were literally exposed to the most insane things on a daily basis, like deadly paints, snake oil salesmen, smoke-filled cities lacking a proper sewage system, and a medical industry that had absolutely no idea what it was doing. They discovered washing your hands during this era because babies kept getting sick after the doctors delivering them were handling corpses in the morgue side of the hospital before helping with the birth in the maternity side of the hospital. They didn't know what germs were, and illness was thought to spread through bad air or a miasma. So I'm thankful all I have to worry about in modern times is the world overheating, robots gaining sentience, and microplastics in my food. And chemical spills, and wage slavery, and mass shooters, and corporate money in politics, and World War III. But aside from all that, it's pretty chill. At least kids don't have to work in coal mines or have their labor exploited at a factory. Wait, never mind. But anyway, if you like this story, you'll also like the one I did about Van Gogh's ear and how we've been lied to about it all this time. In it, you'll learn a little bit about his life and what exactly led up to the horrifying incident. Trust me, it doesn't go down how you expect. Click on the next video and I'll see you there.